In a country that was built on the idea that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, there is a system that is meant to kill people, not protect them. The American death penalty system is not a mistake in the code of justice. It is a feature that has been carefully designed, hardened over time, and hidden in the Constitution. The system is not broken, even though it pretends to be a beacon of justice for the worst crimes. It is doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It has survived not in spite of reform, but because of it. It is arbitrary, unfair, and unending. 400 years of changing history, from colonial executions to modern lethal injections, have not made things clearer or fairer. Instead, every change, or reform, has just been a cosmetic change that hides the violence underneath. What started out as a public show has turned into a bureaucratic ritual. But the violence is still there, hidden under layers of legalese and sterile procedure. The modern version of capital punishment, which was shaped by important Supreme Court cases like Furman versus Georgia and Gregg versus Georgia, was meant to be fair and consistent. Instead, it created a system that seems logical but doesn't work that way. In this system, whether you live or die depends less on what you did and more on who you are, where you are, and who your victim was. This contradiction is not new. The death penalty has always been at odds with what America stands for. The story starts in Jamestown in 1608. Captain George Kendall was shot by a firing squad after being accused of spying for the Spanish. This was one of the first state-sanctioned killings in what would become the United States. It didn't take long for the colonies to pass laws that made a lot of crimes punishable by death. In Virginia, you could be put to death for stealing grapes or trading with Native Americans without a license. In Puritan, Massachusetts, you could be hanged for not following religious rules. These policies weren't made up. They were meant to keep people in line. The message was clear. Do what you're told or die. Dissent meant death. However, the founders, men who put their lives on the line for freedom, saw the moral conflict. Thomas Jefferson tried, but failed, to limit the death penalty in Virginia. Benjamin Rush, a doctor and signer of the Declaration of Independence, spoke out against it in every way. Their protests didn't stop the executions, but they did start a conflict that would last for hundreds of years. In 1794, Pennsylvania did something that had never been done before. It got rid of the death penalty for all crimes except first-degree murder. It was the first time the law said that not all murders and not all people should be punished the same way. But even that change came with a quiet betrayal. The system still made room for death, and by doing so, it made it possible for mistakes, bias, and cruelty to happen again. By the 1800s, public hangings were controversial not because they were unfair, but because they were too easy to see. The state then moved executions from the public square to behind prison walls. The horror stayed, but the audience left. Then there was the electric chair, the gas chamber, and finally the syringe. Each one was said to be more humane than the last, but none of it changed the basic truth. The state still kills and still makes mistakes. The American death penalty went through a lot of ups and downs in the 20th century, with its use going up, down, and then coming back to life through a legal trick. 2 Supreme Court decisions that changed everything and almost nothing were at the heart of this change. Furman versus Georgia put a stop to the death penalty in 1972. But 4 years later, in Gregg versus Georgia, it was rebuilt and given new names like fair, guided, and constitutional. It was like walking a constitutional tightrope. A system that was too random to live was brought back to life, with procedural changes that promised justice but hid the fact that it was still a mess. The court threw out the death penalty in Furman, not because it was cruel in theory, but because it was cruel in practice. Justice Stewart said that juries were giving out death sentences without any guidelines, which led to wanton and freakish results. It wasn't the law, it was a lottery. The decision shocked the whole country. Hundreds of death sentences were changed overnight, but the door was left open. 2 justices thought that the death penalty was always against the law. The others were more concerned with procedure. suggesting that capital punishment could come back if states changed the rules, and it came back, but with new packaging. In Gregg versus Georgia, the court agreed to a new legal system that included separate trials, factors that made the crime worse or better, and automatic appeals. People called these mechanisms breakthroughs, a constitutional fix for the randomness that Furman showed. But it didn't really help. The ultimate authority, the choice to pursue death initially, remained in the unregulated control of prosecutors, and that power was used in ways that made the biases the court said it wanted to get rid of even stronger. What happened? A system that looks like it works on purpose, but actually works on instinct and bias. A system in which the outcome for a defendant is determined more by their skin color, the jurisdiction of their trial, and the effectiveness, or lack thereof, of their defense than by the facts of the crime. Justice John Paul Stevens, one of the people who helped create Gregg, would later say it was a mistake. He said that the protections had failed and that the modern death penalty was very different from what we thought we were allowing. And behind these legal masks is a dark pattern. Race, location, and wealth, not justice, determine who perishes. Research indicates that the most dependable predictor of a death sentence is not the crime's nature, but the victim's race. If you kill a white person, you are much more likely to be put to death. If you kill a black person, the system often doesn't do anything. Some counties, especially in the Deep South, have aggressive prosecutors who turn their counties into execution factories. Other counties never even try to get the death penalty. It isn't fair. It's a game of chance. The role of poverty is even more troubling. Most people on death row couldn't pay for their own lawyer. They were given lawyers who were overworked, underpaid, and, in some cases, drunk, asleep in court, or completely unqualified. These aren't just sad footnotes. They are the standard in the system. A defendant's life is often in the hands of someone who doesn't have the money to do an investigation, cross-examine, or mount a good defense. The question becomes terrifyingly simple. Is this person being put to death because of what they did, or because of who they are, where they were, and how little money they had? There is one thing that the American death penalty can't deny. It kills people who are innocent. Not in a figurative sense, not in theory, but really, over and over. For decades, people who supported the death penalty said that wrongful executions were an unfortunate but rare event. Tragic, yes, but not statistically significant. That illusion is no longer true. We now know that 1 out of every 8 people who were executed in the modern era has been cleared of wrongdoing. That's not a problem with the system. That is how the system works. Think about what this means. At least 200 people who were sentenced to death have since been completely cleared of all charges. This was done by DNA evidence, witnesses changing their stories, or prosecutors admitting to wrongdoing. And those are just the ones we've caught. The death penalty is the end, and nothing can change it. A mistake means killing someone for something they didn't do. And in a system that has a lot of systemic errors, those mistakes are not uncommon. They are unavoidable. These wrong convictions don't happen by themselves. They are made by a predictable mix of bad behavior by officials, false testimony, a weak defense, and unreliable forensic science. Prosecutors have kept evidence that could clear the defendant from the public. Police have forced people to confess. Witnesses have lied to get a break. Forensic analysts have said, with scientific certainty, things that the schools that trained them later said were wrong. What happened? Dozens, if not hundreds, of innocent people walked toward execution chambers. Some were saved at the last minute, but others were not. But that's not the end of the failure. The way the death penalty is carried out through what is called a humane lethal injection is a horrible lie. Advertised to the public as a painless, quiet procedure similar to falling asleep, it has instead turned into a horrible medical experiment. There are now more botched executions than perfect ones. Inmates have writhed, gasped, convulsed, and died in pain for a long time, sometimes for more than an hour. Lockett, Clayton, Dennis McGuire, Kenneth Smith. These are not outliers. They are signs of things to come. Why? Because of global human rights sanctions that cut off states' access to pharmaceutical supplies, they now use experimental drug cocktails that come from unregulated compounders or are smuggled in from unknown suppliers overseas. To protect this failing system, states have passed laws that make it illegal for people to know who makes the drugs, who gives them, or what chemicals they contain. The ultimate irony is that in a country that cares so much about due process, the state is now hiding the means of death to avoid being checked by the Constitution. And all of this, the unfairness, the cruelty, the secrecy, what is it for? People have always said that the death penalty stops people from committing crimes. But years of research have shown that claim to be false. States that don't have the death penalty don't have higher murder rates than those that do. Some studies even say that executions may make violence worse by making human life less valuable, which is called the brutalization effect. In the meantime, capital punishment costs states a lot of money. Tens of millions of dollars are wasted every year on a system that doesn't carry out many executions, and even fewer that are fair. The United States is almost the only country in the world. Over 70% of countries have done away with the death penalty. Europe has completely turned it down. Also, South America. The United States is the only democracy that uses it as often or as chaotically as it does. America is still using this old-fashioned method, which puts it in the same group as countries it often criticizes for human rights abuses. It goes against everything it says it stands for. The American death penalty is not just a failure. It goes against the law, logic, and morality. It is a system that pretends to be about justice but is really about show, cruelty, and mistakes. It lives on because it is hidden behind the rules of court, legal jargon, and prison walls. But no amount of procedure can get rid of what's underneath. It's too late for change. The death penalty is not broken. It was made this way.